Namaste.
Namaste.
Good evening, Professor Kaushal. Today's distinguished speaker, Dr. Geetesh Nirban, co-convener of the webinar series that we have been organizing, and distinguished invitees, dear friends interested in Mahabharata scholarship. I welcome you all to the 24th session of this series of webinars on Mahabharata, as hosted by Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi, Kamala Nehru College, University of Delhi. These webinars are being organized under the aegis of Spark project, which is a scheme for promotion of academic and research collaboration, an initiative of Ministry of Human Resource Development, now named as Ministry of Education, Government of India. The title of the project is Yoga Consciousness in Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita, an ethical value for societal and political well-being. We are working as a team for the project along with Professor Vishwa Adluri from Hunter College, City University of New York, USA, as our international principal investigator, Dr. Joydeep Bagchi from Germany, who is associated with Hindu University of America as co-investigator from international arena, and Dr. Geetesh Nirban from Department of Philosophy, Kamala Nehru College as Indian co-investigator, and me, Professor Bala, the head of the Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi, as the Indian principal investigator. Our extended team consists of Ms. Jayashree, Ms. Anmol, and Ms. Megha Kapoor, who are the research scholars in the Department of Philosophy at University of Delhi, and Ms. Deepshika, who is a postgraduate student of Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi. As far as the project is concerned, there are three important focus areas which we are trying to concentrate in this project. One is the yoga consciousness in Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita, and the other one is the ethical values of societal well-being, which is termed as Loka Sangraha in Mahabharata. The third important pointer that we would be looking at in this project is ethical value of political well-being as well, because looking at the societal well-being is not sufficient to have a holistic understanding of the well-being of the individual. That is how both social and political well-being is being discussed in this project. And how do we try to do this? We endeavor to look at the societal and political well-being by trying to understand what is the right course of action that is being prescribed in the text Bhagavad Gita, Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita. And if at all we have to look at what is the right course of action, the problem that we confront with is how to identify what is the right course of action. And in this process, even if we tend to know how to identify right course of action, and even if we identify what is the right course of action, then the problem that we confront with is how to perform this right course of action in the contemporary context. So these are the important areas that we would be dealing with in this project. And these series of webinars are our humble attempt to make the various aspects of Mahabharata reach the diverse audience who hold interest in the study of the epic. We started this series of webinars during the extreme phase of lockdown to engage minds with Mahabharata. We have had the privilege of hosting scholars of repute from universities and organizations in India and abroad, wherein diverse topics related to Mahabharata, Bhagavad Gita have been touched, ranging from societal and political well-being and ethical dilemmas, justice, consciousness, karma yoga, and instrumental violence, humanness in punishment, environmental influences, dialogical consciousness, and many more topics pertaining to the epic, all as an attempt to explore Mahabharata from the human well-being. We are very honored to have today with us Dr. Kaushal, Professor Performance Studies, Head Janapada Sampada Division, Indira Gandhi National Center for Art. She would be speaking on text and performance, exploring the living traditions of the Mahabharata among the folk and tribal communities of India. We have been stressing this point that Mahabharata is not merely a text in the literal sense of the term, it is also a living tradition. And if it is living tradition, how do we understand that? It is a performing tradition. That is how it is a living tradition. Living tradition can be understood and explored in many different ways. And one of the ways of understanding the living tradition is by looking at its performative aspect, which is prevalent in various parts of the country. And that is what is very important to capture. And we have been stressing this importance to understand this aspect of living tradition of Mahabharata in the previous episodes that we had. And within this, what is also very important is we find a distinction between popular tradition and folk tradition. It is not that Mahabharata is only limited to popular tradition. And it is not that, as we were a few minutes back saying, Mahabharata as a text is surviving or Mahabharata as a tradition is surviving because of the academicians or academic communities. It is alive only because of the people, and since it belongs to the people, and that's where the folk traditions and tribal traditions are also equally important, which have got affected by the text and also which imbibed the tradition into their everyday life fold. And that's where we have to look at, and we have a wonderful opportunity today to listen to Dr. Molly Kaushal, who has come forward to talk to us about how these living traditions of Mahabharata among folk and tribal communities is being practiced. And I welcome her. And without wasting much time, I request Dr. Gitesh to introduce the speaker and take the proceedings further. Over to you, Dr. Gitesh.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Bala. Namaskar and good evening to all. Welcome you all to the 24th webinar under the aegis of Spark platform. We have with us Dr. Molly Kaushal. Professor Bala just shared with all of us. She's an academic, a curator, and a film director. Dr. Kaushal is a professor of performance studies and heads the Janapada Sampada division of Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts at New Delhi, where she teaches courses on Indian folklore and intangible cultural heritage. Dr. Kaushal is the project head and principal investigator of several studies launched at IGNCA, including living traditions of the Ramayana and Mahabharata, an area where she has made significant contribution by documenting several oral, pictorial, ritual, and performing traditions of the twin epics across India while directing several documentaries and building up a massive audio-visual archive at IGNCA. She has brought out several translations, both in Hindi and English, of folk and tribal narratives of the Ramayana and Mahabharat, and has edited several books on the oral and performing traditions associated with these two epics. She's been organizing several international and national conferences, seminars, and workshops, accompanied by thematic exhibitions and cultural festivals centered on oral, narratives, rituals, performance, and craft traditions of the two epics. She's been responsible for creating a strong and a vibrant platform for a dialogue between the artists and scholars at the center. Professor Kaushal is currently the lead academic expert and project head for the UNESCO IGNCA project titled Evolving Methodologies for Community-Based Inventorying of Intangible Cultural Heritage, which is a case study of the Bani region of Gujarat. In 2019, she was invited by the Yale University, Stanford University, and Berkeley, California University to deliver invited public lectures on notions of bhakti in folk religion, folk and tribal Ramayanas, composite nature of Ramlila tradition, where she also screened her nationally and internationally much acclaimed documentary, Leela in Keria. This film has won Certificate of Excellence at Dadasaheb Phalke Film Festival in 2018 and has been screened at Indian Pavilion at Cannes Film Festival and Indo-German Film Week in Berlin. She has major publications to her credit Quite a lot of books are there. I would name one very important book from the perspective of our project, which is Aesthetic Textures, Living Traditions of the Mahabharat, published in 2019. And she has a forthcoming book titled as Ramlila, Mobility, Patronage and Aesthetics, as well as Gond Ramayani, which I think has been published in 2020. Dr. Kaushal has produced 3 DVDs with English translation of Mewati, Bhili, and Bundeli Ramkathas. She's curated much acclaimed thematic exhibitions, which include Leela, an exhibition based on the Ramayana and Ramlila tradition in 2017, Sacred Geography and Performance, Living Traditions of Mahabharat in 2011, Akhyana, Mask, Puppets, and Picture Showman Traditions of India in 2010. Dr. Bala just mentioned that the impact of Mahabharat has had on the cultural milieu of the country is apparent, not just only in the vast quantity of literature, but also in the visual and the performing arts of India. And here we have Dr. Kaushal, who is going to deliver an address on text and performance, exploring the living traditions of the Mahabharat among the folk and tribal communities of India. We welcome you, ma'am, to our webinar of today. Over to you, Dr. Kaushal.
Thank you so much. It's a great honor to be speaking on this platform. And particularly, as I was telling both Bala Ganpatiji and Gitesh, that I'm really not a student of the textual stream of the epics. And here I am on this platform, which has a lot to do with text, but I kind of got assured when Bala Ganpatiji told me that they've been emphasizing on the living traditions of the Mahabharata throughout their discourse on this prestigious platform. And while, Ramayana, I started my engagement with Ramayana much before I came to the field of the Mahabharat. And in a manner of speaking, my understanding probably of the Ramayana tradition is little sounder than I can say that of the Mahabharata at this stage, at least. But yes, it was like 2010 that after having started the Ramayana in folk and tribal traditions, that I began to really look at these traditions in terms of living traditions and began to wonder that if Mahabharata also throws up such a plethora of living traditions as does the Ramayana. For Ramayana, one very, one immediate recognition that comes to us is that of the Ramlila, at least in northern India. So come Dasera and, you have the Ramlilas being performed all over. And the tradition itself is multiple, even within the same generic boundary as that of the Ramlila. And I started wondering that what happens to Mahabharata. And I was also very curious because, as you all know, that Mahabharata is being termed as a tabooed text. It's inauspicious to keep it in home. It is inauspicious to kind of, read the entire Mahabharata at one go. And after all, popularly it is seen as a war. It's a book of fratricide. It's a book of war. It's a book of total annihilation. And so could there be living traditions of the Mahabharata, really? I mean, if it's such a taboo thing. And then, in fact, I turned to the text itself and I thought that, no, it's not possible, because text itself is speaking about a very, very vibrant living tradition of the Katha Vachan of the Mahabharata. And it's happening right, from the whole story of from Jaya to Bharat to Mahabharat itself. And then Vyas himself is talking about the fact that he's not the only one who has sung and spoken about the Jaya. And in 2010, I thought that, well, let me turn and see if we I absolutely never suspected that there could be a living Katha Vachan tradition. Yes, I was aware that there's a Pandwani happening somewhere, a bit of it, and something in the south, and Kudiyattam, and some of these performances that I was aware of. But as my journey began with the Mahabharat in 2010, and I discovered that right in Banaras, sitting on the Vyas Peeth, the Vyas Katha Vachik still does his Katha Vachan of the Mahabharat. So it's an intriguing fact that at what time, at what period, and for what reasons that Mahabharat came to be seen as an inauspicious text to be read or worshipped or to be kept inside the house. I remember that in 2011, when I was having the international conference on the Mahabharat, Acharya Srivas Goswamiji, who's the head priest of Radha Raman temple in Vrindavan, and not only that, he's a very erudite and very well-known international scholar of the Vaishnava theology and Vaishnava traditions, narrated an incident that one of his disciples came to him. He was a young tycoon, a big businessman, and he wanted to have the Mahābhārata Katha Vachana right at home. And Swamiji Acharya Srivasji said, okay, why not? Wonderful, let's have that thing going. And but after 4 days, the disciple returned and he said, I'm sorry, but and he was really little like sad, and he said, I can't have because my mother, and he was the only son, and his mother said, there's nothing to it, you can't have the Mahabharata Katha Vachana going at home, I will never let that happen. So with that background, to actually think that communities would still be having traditions of the Mahabharata, where not only the Vachan, but the Nritya, the Gayan, and the rituals and all that is happening. And then to discover this, Acharya Vyas Palandeji in Banaras, and who was doing the Katha Vachan. And if I can show you, I mean, maybe in a little while, I've taken a very small clip of his in which he is, he's doing the Katha Vachana. I invited him in 2011 to IGNC, when after a year's engagement with these various traditions, I curated almost a month-long festival called Jaya. And also the reason why would I not call Mahabharat and why would I want to call it Jaya is, again, actually my understanding derives not so much from the fact that the first book of the Bharata war was actually called Jaya, but again, it was explained to me by Goswamiji again that the difference between the Vijay, the concept of the Vijay and the Jai, and that brings us also back to the whole, the text as the Mahabharata as being a tree. And then there are two kinds of trees, or one which is the Duryodhana, and the other is where the Tana, the stem, the trunk is Yudhishthira, and one is the tree of Dharma, and one is the tree of arrogance and blind anger. And very interestingly, it doesn't call it the tree of Adharma. It's of that blind rage and blind anger and arrogance, in whose roots are that of Dhritarashtra, and the other tree whose roots is Krishna. So the Jaya, the Vijaya can sit on the tree of Duryodhana, but Jaya will sit because Jaya is devoid of arrogance of the victory. So victory, there is the celebration of life. And I thought, when I looked at these traditions, and I said that what these communities, whether they were folk or they were tribal, because all these categories are very, very problematic categories. We have adopted them from sources that really refer to categories which are sociological categories, and necessarily, and and do not uh, throw a complete light on the relationships. And that is why I think somewhere this whole duality, there's a binary, that the textual and the oral, the textual and the performance, the classical and the folk, is all arising out of that kind of understanding. And we are, when we encounter the living traditions, when we encounter tales, if you want to say, because there are oral tales, and actually when we are talking about the living traditions, even this whole textual and oral is a very futile exercise to get into, because the Mahabharat or any text can actually survive only if it is acceptable in law, if it is practiced, if it's lived, it's turned into a creation which is going to survive for all times to come. And who does that? And it is the lok, it is the folk. And to categorize that folk as a sociological category is at the root of the problem, in which we want to see every other rendition, every other telling, either in comparison or as an alternative text or as a counter text. So these problems begin to happen because we are right from the beginning are on the wrong premise, and we ignore the long history of interconnections of the various communities of this geographic region, where there's been a mutual borrowings, where there have been interactions to the extent that today we do not know what the Mahabharat took from the folk, from the oral traditions, and what orality has taken from the text. So it's a stream which is going it's going straight away upwards in one moment, and it has, as Vasudev Sharan Agarwal called, the multiple streams that were coming into it from the various ghats, and where intense interactions took place. So at the level of a living tradition, at the level of a practice tradition, we can definitely talk about Vad with Samvad. And even if there is a Vivad has got to be resolved through the Samvad. So these very, very tense interactions, very, very intense interactions is what has actually given birth to these multiple traditions. It's a whole gamut, which is right from the northeast down to Kanyakumari. You go Kashmir to Kanyakumari, you go to south, you go to north, and in between, of course, there is this whole region in which we, the Bhagavad area, where all of a sudden, the Mahabharat is a little dicey thing. And again, as Goswami ji, I probably would be referring to him a lot of time, because I learned a lot from him in terms of these traditions. And he said that, the Bhargav clan has usurped the Mahabharat, and the Bhagavad, the very birth of Bhagavad is actually, in his words, is in the lap of the Mahabharat. And I agree with him with this completely, because Mahabharat, which is looked as a war book, as a book of fratricide, as a book, somebody calls it Dukhand, it's a tragedy, somebody is leading it to Shantrasa. Then we have the Harivansha, the Khilla, and then there are all these arguments as to whether, it is an interpolation, it is later. But what you see is that Harivansha is a logical culmination, and the very seeds of the Bhakti movement, in a manner of speaking, are actually sown in the very book of the Mahabharat. And had that war not led to the disassociation, the disappointment, and disattachment with the worldly affairs, the Harivansha would not have come into being. And from that, you turn to the Vatsalya Ras, you turn to the Gopala, and a new new kind of then understanding of life and understanding of this relationship of the man with his creator begins to develop. So I think Mahabharat is the first stepping stone for the bhakti movement to actually have taken place. The Bhagavad could not have happened without the Mahabharat. So and that is where, which brings me then to the folk tradition, that if Jaya was this celebration, what was the folk doing? Was it lamenting? Really, was it again among them also a tradition which was fraught with this entire disillusionment with life, and which seemed very, very unrealistic, because life as it flows, the life as it exists, its basic uh, anchor is for the survival. The life must continue, and which very very, very poignantly, this aspect has been also brought out by Vidyanivas Mishra ji. He wrote this whole book called Mahābhārata Kavya Marg. And then he says that actually what the and I'm not going into the fact of the Mahabharata as an allegory or Mahabharata as an internal journey, because this is all what you would be speaking about so often on your discourse. But one thing, that one line which I think was very important is that he brings in this whole notion of writ in the Indian context, and he says that what is the ultimate truth of the Mahabharata? And he says that the ultimate and the highest truth of the Mahabharata is the ever-flowing stream of life, and that it does happen that there are very, very arduous journeys, there are very, very dark moments in this flow of this writ, in the flow of this life, and the highest truth, the absolute truth, and the one which is above dharma. The dharma could be relativistic, it is context bound, but writ is not, and still writ can be threatened, the cosmic order can be threatened. And what should one do at that time when this cosmic order is threatened? Is that you have to reaffirm the faith. You have to reaffirm the faith in the very ever-flowing flow of this life and keep the candle burning. So who has kept this candle burning is the next question. That where is this candle burning? If it's not burning in the human heart, where else can it burn? And if I have to look for this candle, where do I go? I go to the communities, I go to life itself, I go to people, I go to the communities who sing these narratives till date, who still perform the Shraddha rituals for the Kauravas as well as for the Pandavas and for their ancestors, the Pandus and the Dhritarashtras. Unless I go back to them, how can I really understand what this overflowing river of life really is, and which, according to, in the words of Vidyanivas Mishra ji, is the highest truth that the Mahabharata is propagating. So, so when I started looking, and I went and I looked at the Pandwani of the Chhattisgarh, and then the Garhwal traditions, the entire terrain of in Garhwal in Uttarakhand, which is called the Kaurav Kshetra, and then the kind of rituals that were happening, the Pando Nritya and the Pandav Leelas. And back I go to south and I go to Kudiyattam. So even before I go to Kudiyattam, I came across Bhash, and I was surprised that it was somewhere in the 4th century BC, that already there was this very healthy performing tradition. And if Bhash was writing these plays, he was obviously writing not just to put them in a book and put them in some corner. So obviously a very vibrant tradition was already existing. And we also have reference to this of performing tradition right from a lot of Vedic literature. And we have the Gathas, we have the Narashansis, and we know how at the various Vedic yagnas, and especially the Ashwamedh yagna, that we had these very, very strong performing traditions which involve both singing, which involve enactment, which involve dancing. And so the tradition, it is, and many scholars believe that, then the later traditions of performance of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana are probably emerging from these very ritual sites. I am not that erudite scholar of Vedic traditions to say anything further on it, but just pointing towards it. And so, okay, now what happened to my journey where I said there is no Mahabharata tradition? And at this point, I would like to say that wherever I looked, wherever my eyes turned, Mahabharata was happening everywhere. And just before this lecture, we were talking to Professor Bala Ganapati, and he told me about the Kuppam, and I said, yes, and the Chittor district, and you have this whole 18-day Mahabharata going. We've heard of the Ram Leela. So as in the North India, you have this whole Ram Leela tradition. In the South, you have this whole tradition of the Mahabharata enactment happening, and all kind of episodes are being enacted. And they are enacted again to kind of belie this fact that Mahabharata is only a book of war, because what Mahabharata is doing through these various rituals and these festivals in which the narration is accompanied by ritual is accompanied by a theatrical enactment, and at many times even the Pattabhishekams happen and Rajabhishekams happen, and then you have this whole lot of these traditions end with the walk through the fire or walking on the coals. And so if Bakasur Vad is happening, I mean, this was one of my scholars from Andhra, Professor Subachari, who worked on that tradition, and we realized that how the entire village actually, and it's got nothing to do with caste, it's got nothing to do with social hierarchies, they all participate. So now we all know that Bakasur Vad, the truckloads of food has to go, and the entire village would provide that food, which is later, of course, distributed as prasadam. But how the tradition was functioning at multiple levels. At one level, it was transporting the entire space and time. It is transcending the immediate space and time into cosmic space and time. At the same time, it is creating communal harmony, the community harmony. It is shaping up community identities. And community identities, again, I'm aware of the fact that it cannot be a homogeneous concept. After all, the societies are vertically, sociologically, hierarchically divided, and how these very texts then become the mediums through which social mobility is enacted, and how the I would like, if we say talk about the Ramayana, for example, then we say that it establishes the divine kinship. And for a lot of royalty, the king, royal houses, the descendancy from the Raghuvanshi clan legitimizes their existence. Similarly, you would see that particularly in the case of Mahabharata, that entire movement towards Rajputization of the communities which are struggling to acquire the status of Kshatriya, and it especially happens in the tribal belts, and it definitely happens in the tribal belts of the Uttarakhand and Himachal, that Mahabharata is being used as a text to create and establish this sacred divine descent and for social mobility. So this is happening also in the Kuppam festival, in the Andhra festival. And then very interesting thing that again happens is I'm remaining with the South for the minute, and it is also in parts of Kerala, but primarily if you look at Tamil Nadu, the Draupadi Amman cult. And that's very interesting again, is that in these oral performative traditions, there are certain characters which are favorite of the people. Okay, and when we were looking at the Ramayana, I can tell you that more than Rama, it is Lakshman, who is the main hero. And there'll be so many times there are twists and transformations in the tale where Lakshman has to be put at the center of that whole. And similarly, in the case of the living traditions or oral traditions or whatever word, because I want to come back to the living word in the later part of my argument, is that it's being, for example. So actually the real man of the Mahabharata is seen as Bhima by the folk and tribal communities. And it is not only just as a valor, and it's not because, he is so powerful and he's so big. That's not the reason. One is that his relationship to Draupadi is very central. If there is someone who vows to avenge, if there is someone who's angry at what has happened to Draupadi, it is Bhima who's coming again and again. And if it is the flower that the Draupadi wants, and that one who really goes in search of that flower is again Bhim. So Bhim has very multi-layered roles to play. And so even in the Draupadi Amman festival, though they are happening in either the Draupadi Amman temples or on the Dharam Rajas, this thing, Bhim has a very important and a significant role to play. And the second character itself is Draupadi. Draupadi is very important, whether it's south, whether it's north, whether it is in the Uttarakhand. And she, hi Anjali, I can see you there. Hello. And we see that she actually is the most powerful of the characters. She even leaves the 5 Pandavas behind in terms of how the folk and the tribal tales or the Bharatas have portrayed. I am reminded here of a very interesting oral narrative from the Bhils, and it's very interesting in the Bhili Bharat. This is documented by Bhagwan Das Patel. And in that, Bhim, one sees that Draupadi and Yudhishthir are together, and Yudhishthir is, pressing her legs, he's touching his feet, he's fanning Draupadi, and he's like angered. This is toxic masculinity, and he can't take it. He says, whatever it may be, how much ever you may love your wife, how can anyone touch his wife's feet? And he's very, very distraught. And so Draupadi, and he says either he should kill Yudhishthir, or he should kill Draupadi, or he should kill himself. And he goes and he lies in, one of those abandoned rooms on his cot. And Draupadi gets to know about it. And I wish if I have it here, I would like to read. So Draupadi says, okay, I believe you are really upset over something, and let's sort this out, let's talk this out, and invites him to one of the sacred groves. It's called Sindur Bada, the banyan tree groves, and at midnight, So Bhim has no option but to agree, and he's really scared for his life also, because he doesn't know what she's up to, but he says, okay, I'll come. And so when in the midnight, he goes to this sacred grove, and he sees that, God himself, God Almighty, is sitting on a silver throne there. And in a while, Draupadi arrives there. And who is this Draupadi? She's a 1,000-armed goddess. And she's holding these diyas, every hand holds a lit diya, and she has dagger in her hand. And when she's followed, there's a retinue of all the deities, gods and goddesses who follow her. And then she comes, and God himself gets up, and he is sitting on a silver throne, but he offers the golden throne to Draupadi to sit. And so, and then Bhima hears her speak to the Almighty God, and there it turns out that the Almighty God is Vishnu, of course, and she is avatar of Lakshmi, because God says, when will you come back and what's happening? And she says that, everybody is now come under my control except Janapada, that is Yudhishthira. So you see how the story began, in the sense that how Bhima is reading these signs, and how Draupadi is reading these signs, and he says that though, he really respects me and takes care of me, but he's the only one who's still not under my sway. So, it seemingly very, very, you would say like these are stories. I mean, earlier scholars looked at them as derivatives, as distortions, and people not knowing what. But you would see that within these very, very, simple looking stories, there are such deep meanings, which are metaphysical, which are philosophical, which deal with the question of human relationships, of social institutions. So in a way that you cannot look at the text as the epitome of something, and the oral performative traditions which simplify. In fact, they even further complicate, because they may not be directly speaking about these very big truths, and they use metaphors, they use similes, they use very, very complex situations through which they begin to speak about their understanding of life. This, staying with this Bhil epic a little more, to stress my point, is that again in the Bhil Bharat, and that is, as I said, documented by Bhagwan Das Patel, we encounter another very interesting, and I hope that I don't offend anybody's sensitivities and sensibilities at this point, because I'm taking this example to make a point about how to read into these texts. Is that there is this whole story that once, Draupadi is combing her hair and she's got golden hair, and one strand, falls into the pond, and then through that it reaches Netherlands, and it falls at the chest of the snake god, and Vasuki, the serpent. And Vasuki falls in love with Draupadi, and he's a mighty warrior, and he, again, the toxic masculinity kind of, masculine figure, and he comes and he finds out, and then he enters by force Draupadi's chamber, and Draupadi says, what are you doing? When my husband gets to know, he'll kill you and all, and but he's so enamored that he couldn't care less. And then in the meanwhile, Arjun comes, and then he just hangs him with the peg, on the peg. Arjun is hanging, and Draupadi, and they start playing chopper, and then they make love, and Arjun is just watching helplessly, and in the end, like, he's hung him by the, one of the hair of his mustache, and then he kind of, lets Arjun free. And a lot of scholars, in fact, even in my own 2011 seminar, began to look at this, from very, very psychoanalytical kind of readings, which we are very good at doing. And, how this is Draupadi being raped, and second was good. No, it is actually, women always desire very powerful men. So it's Draupadi's desire for this. And this modernist gaze onto these traditions without looking at where they're coming from, what their contexts are. And then we get informed that actually this whole epic is situated in a very, very religious, spiritual context of the Bhil society, and its matriarchal contours of that spiritual practices, which is called Mahamargi or Nirjar Panth. And within that, when they look at this tradition, and they have certain rituals of a certain kind, And then when you look at it into the background of that, into this text, that you actually realize that through this episode and through this language, a whole discourse on body, possessiveness of the body, possessiveness about relationships, possessiveness about the uh, uh, bodies of the spouses, the ego, all these discourses are taking place here in this. And it is such a deep text. And unless you have gone into that context, so the living tradition also has a living context. And if you only want to keep looking at it, wo Draupadi ko aise kaise kar diya, what, so you always end up giving very, very misinformed interpretations of both the community and its practices and the aesthetic manifestations that arise out of those practices. And actually what is happening here, as Dr. Patel explains in one of his writings, is that this whole episode is in which the Draupadi overcomes her carnal desire and Arjun overcomes the very egoistic idea about his own valor and body and the spouse's body. So something very deep and something very different is happening in this tradition. At the same time, when you come, let's say, when you come to the, you come to the areas of Rajasthan, for example, again, Draupadi is a very, very powerful character. She is a very questioning character. And in fact, as I said about oral and written, now, a lot of scholars have worked on these oral traditions of the Rajasthan, and I had an opportunity to interact with some of them. I had an opportunity to get some of these traditions at the IGNC and look at this. And then we discovered that lok or oral tradition is not only to be understood as Gana ga rahe hain, ritual mana rahe hain, naach rahe hain, that even very, very erudite scholars of the oral tradition create and compose. So it's not that it's only one, anonymous, collectively produced thing only, which can be seen in terms of folk or oral, but even individual creations which transcend the author and become part of the folk tradition, where people are well versed, they sing these, they narrate these, they're well acquainted, and it becomes part of that flowing tradition. And in that tradition, there was a creation by one Saint Ganesh Puri from Rajasthan. And when you talk about the living tradition, the question that arises is that what makes a tradition living? Why do we say that a tradition is a living tradition? Just mere fact because there is a story there, or just mere fact that there is a ritual there, or just a mere fact that there is a dance there, or maybe because authors are writing. The point is that why communities, why people, why authors, why individuals keep dipping into this pool of the Mahābhārata, and what are they coming up with, and why are they coming up with? Why is it very important? And as I said, that Vad and Samvad, a tradition remains alive only if there is this Samvad. And that Samvad, that dialogue can only happen in the present. The dialogue is happening with the past in order to understand the present. It is the present that is actually bothers. It is the problem of now and the situatedness of here and now that makes the tradition alive. So tradition doesn't just belong to the past. Tradition is the situatedness of that particular stream of knowledge, or of that particular expression, to be relevant to the present. And its relevance can only be there if there's a dialogue. And if there is a dialogue, there is bound to be Vad and there's bound to be Samvad. And that is why there was this wonderful book that Radha Vallabh Tripathi has come up with, which is called the tradition of the Vak, this in the Sanskrit tradition. So we are, when we saying that the tradition is a living tradition, is that you're challenging the boundaries of the tradition and of the present both. Because the human predicament, if that flow which Vidyanivas Mishra is talking, if that flow has to be kept ever flowing, if the width has to remain shining and illuminating, then that boundaries have to be challenged. And unless those boundaries are challenged, then tradition will become, then it's not a tradition. I mean, then the word using parampara or tradition itself then is, then you're talking about, for us, epic, what is an epic for in India? Is a question that we have to, what is Mahabharat for us? What is Ramayana for us? Why are they important? Just because they are religious texts? Is that what the only role that the epics are playing? The entire consciousness of this civilization is the epic consciousness. And why is that an epic consciousness? Is because this tradition is constantly challenging, constantly throwing questions, and constantly providing solutions to the issues of the present. That is why it is a living tradition. So coming back to this whole Ganesh Puri thing is which I'm very fond of reading this because I absolutely find it fascinating. When Matilal was writing, he's written so much on the Mahabharat, and then Professor Matilal, and he said that, Indian orthodoxy would never kind of ever agree to the fact that there are moral dilemmas in the Mahabharat. Because you have ubiquitous mathematician, the Krishna, there, who is giving you all the answers, isn't he there? So, whereas actually, unless there is this challenge thrown, the tradition cannot remain a living. It cannot become it's neither a tradition nor can it be a living tradition. Then it's just a text. And we must understand that unlike the Ramayana, for example, the Mahabharat is first and foremost not a granth. It's not a book. In the context of the Ramayana, we can still say so that while we are performing, and no matter whether I'm performing Radhe Shyam Kathavachak's Ramayana in the Ram Leela, or whether I'm performing a local poet's ki Samvad Pustika, you know that we have these dialogue books written by local poets, and most of the Ram Leelas are based on Radhe Shyam Kathavachak. They also take from Keshav's Ramchandrika. So there are all kind of texts that come into play when the performance is being, when performance is happening. The performance text can be something very, very different from the Ramayana text. But no matter what text you may be using, the mental text is Tulsi's Ramcharitmanas for Ram Leela. And that's the period. Whether you're performing, so the center of the Ram Leela performance is the Tulsi's Ramcharitmanas, whether it is the actually performed text or not. But in case of Mahabharat, if you would see, again, so many Mahabharatas have been written. I was just talking about the Tirakutu, that 18-day festival that's happening, the Draupadi Amman festival, in which there are many episodes from the Mahabharata that are enacted. It has narration, it has a processional theatre, and it has the proper theatrical presentation. So many, and it is written by Vilu Putra as a text, the Mahabharata text. So as Ramayana, there are many, many translations, adaptations also of the Mahabharata, and each specific region, linguistic group uses its own adaptation. Now, while they are performing the Mahabharata, the Mahabharat as Vyasa's text is not at the center. It's not there. They are performing the story. The story is important. The tale of the Mahabharat is important. But the question, like Tulsi's Ramcharitmanas, is not at the center or the heart of these performances at all. So the texts that are being performed are received from various sources. They can be creations which are very, very rigid in the sense that you cannot perform outside there, but they're community texts. They may be coming to you from printed text. They may be mental text. They may be texts that have been received from various other sources that come into play when the actual performance is happening and you are performing the story of Mahabharata. Okay, now when you're performing the story of Mahabharata, what you're doing is that you're performing your own story. You're performing history. And what kind of history are you performing? It's the history of what it means to be that community. Okay, so when the Garhwalis are performing the Mahabharata, they are the descendants of the Pandavas. They are the descendants of the Kauravas. As I said, there's a whole belt, and Anjali would bear by me, which is called the Kaurav Kshetra, and who's being worshipped there. Look at the fluidity of this tradition. Look at the amount of openness available in what we call as a living tradition. That there are this Duryodhan there is the ruler, he's the king. He rules over 21 villages and he is Nyaya ka devta. वो न्याय करता है, उसके oracles हैं अपने, उसके rituals हैं. The oracle gets possessed, people come for solution. And very interestingly, both Bhim and Duryodhan, and third also Karna. And in Karnataka, Kunti, for example, how do they get related to agrarian activities, they get related to rain rituals. And so Duryodhan has the power to bring about rain. So he's not only the god of justice, he is also the god of rain. So the kind of engagements that are happening with these. And then you have Karna there. And Karna has 11 villages in which he rules. And in Mahabharat, Karna and Duryodhan are like, thick as thieves. But they are in tension in the Garhwali Mahabharat tradition. And then there are Pandavas also, but Pandavas are not gods. Whereas the divinities, the kind of divinity that is given to Duryodhan and to Karna to a lesser degree, and then also at a distance in another Fatehpur ki Patti, you have the Pandavas have their own reign, and every year, these rituals are enacted. The Pandavas descend on earth. So another thing is that this history that is being performed is not history that's just the past history. It's the history existing in now, the history which is in making here. I'm remaking that. Right here, I'm creating that history through my cultural memory, of which ritual is a very, very powerful tool. And so is the narration. So is the epic. And I'm also creating the history, which is the history of my own ancestors. So then, when this is the case, it can only be celebration, as we began, that it is the ever-flowing river of life, which is the ultimate truth of Mahabharat, as Vidyanivas Mishra says. So it is that truth, it is that tree, and it is that branch, or those branches, that Mahabharat opens out. It opens up to its people who live these stories, who renew these stories, who refresh these stories, regularly, periodically, year after year, and pass it on to the next generation to come. And I do not know how much time I have, Gitesh, because I could go on, and I also want to show some clips. You have to tell me that, ma'am, maybe your discourse should stop, and I have about a 10-minute clips, that because I've talked about these traditions, so it becomes very important that we also see some of these traditions uh, being performed. So when I said that this constant engagement, this constant situatedness in here and now will mean that I have to re-envision the text. I not only re-envision it, and I don't want to use the word text here because that's wrong. As I said, that as a grantha, we are not talking about Mahabharat as granth. We're talking about this tale. We're talking about this history. We're talking about this itihasa. We're talking about this Puran. We're talking about this whole kavya. And then how the communities then are, when they are in this process of creating and recreating it afresh, year after year, ritual after ritual, where the whole question of their identity becomes paramount. The identities are also not frozen, like the tradition is not frozen. So the identities are also in the making all the time. Every time that you are staging the ritual, you are singing the tale, the identity is getting recreated. And this recreation of identity cannot be outside the context of the present. So Duryodhana, for example, in Garhwal, is because there are identity shifts, is began to, now there is a conflict. Then some of them would like to say that no, we are sorry, we were stupid that we were worshipping it as Duryodhana. Actually it is Someshwar Mahadev. So as the discourse changes about the identity, your gods also undergo change. Okay, and once your gods undergo change, the rituals will undergo change. But then backed by ritual, which is very, very, you cannot play with ritual so easily as you can play in a discourse by saying either this or either that. The will ritual will either go away, and if as long as it is there. So when actual enactment happens, you can see the oracle is possessed by Duryodhana because there has been an Urubhanga, okay, and his right leg is like broken. So when the oracle is moving, he has that staff, and he's making sounds which, that he can walk with very great difficulty, and there is so much of pain. And then discourses which you call meta folklore, or want to call it meta discourse, that the communities themselves engage in the interpretation of their own practices. So this whole anthropological thing, the old school of saying that people don't know what they are doing, and the scholars, this very heavily loaded in favor of scholars, anthropologists, ethnographers, who can lay bare the meanings of tradition for the community, actually stands completely outdated and is thrown out, because people actually do discuss what they are doing. It's not that they are doing things they're unaware of. So when Ganesh Puri, I'm coming back to Ganesh Puri, and I'm aware that I'm jumping from one tradition and coming back and going forth. But the purpose is to bring this whole argument together. And I hope I have this somewhere I can read. Otherwise, I will just I'll just, from my memory, I will speak it out, unless I can. I don't know. So let it be. I will just, from my memory. So this is the episode where Karna is there, and his chariot is already kind of stuck in the ground, and Krishna is facing him, and Karan challenges Krishna, and he says that, who do you think you are? You know, you killed the very woman who suckled you at her breast, references to Putna. And he says that you were worried about the disrobing of Draupadi. And what about you when you were on the ghats of Yamuna and you were stealing away the robes of the gopis? And still you say that you have been born as an avatar and a virtue, and my burden is to, and my fate is to lessen the burden of this earth by killing people, you know, to kind of spread this whole earth, to drench it with blood and with dead bodies. So this kind of questioning, and this kind of questioning is coming from a saint poet. Okay, a saint poet that who becomes then a folk poet. So look, so this is what is tradition, and this is what is living tradition. Is that what? So then what is this connection? Then where do we see the connection between what we call as the Mahabharat and what we may want to call as Bharatas, okay, the Bharatas, or the many Bharatas? What is the performing Mahabharatas? What is the tradition? And here again, I kind of fall back once to the Ram Leela, and especially the Ram Leela of Ramnagar, Banaras, and see what the Kathavachaks have to say about the Kathavachaks and the expounders of the text. When they look at the Ram Leela of Ramnagar, they say actually this is a tika. The Ramnagar Ram Leela is the complete realization of the text. So the performance is an audio Shravya Drishya tika, or the realization of that particular text. And when it is happening at the level of the audio and the Shravya and the Drishya, the characters are present there, the engagement is right there, and this relationship is multi-layered. And so automatically, according to them and in relationship to Ram Leela, the true realization of the meaning of the Ramcharitmanas is happening at the Ram Leela. But as I said, that Mahabharat is not a grunt in the way that, and it is not related to Ram, the way that Ramcharitmanas and Ram Leela are related. So then can we really call this a tika or a vyakya, and by which I mean is the interpretations, the many interpretations of the text. And I stick to this, and I stick to it taking help of Kapil Kapoor's work on the Tika Parampara, and where he calls this that these are mass pool of texts. So the tradition, the Mahābhārata tradition, is this mass pool of knowledge that is existing, that constitutes the very breadth, the very soul, the very diversity, the very plurality. And unless this mass pool of knowledge or mass pool of texts were not existing, it will not be a tradition. And if it is not a tradition, it can't be a living tradition. So communities dip into this mass text. These are mass texts. They're available all over. They're available in many ways, many forms, in many generic specificities, many styles. Whether they are dance texts, whether they are sung texts, whether they are texts for today, is that what makes Mahabharat living is also the tradition of the Sthala Puranas, and also of our epics have this inherent quality of journey, which is my life. Yeah, unless our heroes travel, and they travel all over and they travel for years, relationships are built. Very, very familiar, very, very intimate, very, very emotional. So they are your daughters, they're your son-in-laws, they're your bhanjas. Okay, and you share those very, very intimate ties with them. Their sorrows are your sorrows. And you bring your own sorrows while you're telling these tales. Your own sorrows, your own pathos, your own struggles in life. They're all expressed through these relationships that you establish with the heroes and heroines of these epics. At the same time, they again, which Acharya Goswami ji taught me, is the Bhav Bhugol. So I'm not saying sacred geography. I'm not saying sacred. It is that tradition of relationships, of interactions, of connections, of these journeys that turn these landscapes into that mass pool of text. These are another level of the living tradition. And then we are borrowing. So we have, it's not necessarily that there are 20,000, Kurukshetras happening, but wherever you would go, they'll tell you this is the village. And particularly, in case of the Ramayana and the Mahabharat, you will have, so no, Ram was born here only. No, Sita, to yahin pe, jo hai, Prithvi ki andar samai thi. You have this whole Sita Mela happening in Uttarakhand where, they say Sita is the daughter. She was born here. And then they have this annual fair in which, they enact the Sita's Sitaji's going into the earth and taking refuge there. And her hair are left, outside. And this is a beautiful fair that's happening. So it is that these are generative of many more texts, of many more samvads, many more vads, and many more vivads that make our traditions, makes our epics as the consciousness, civilizational consciousness of this land. So with this, I think I would like to share my screen. I'll show you first, if possible, the Palandi. I have a very short clip, and then you spoke about Jai Utsav in 2011. I did this huge festival of Mahabharat, and we had about 1,700 artists who were performing in the lawns of the IGNCA. We are soon going to lose those lawns. So I don't know when will we ever have of that scale. We had an exhibition which ran for 2 months into sacred geographies and aesthetic expressions. And we actually brought the entire Draupadi Amman festival and the Terakuthu tradition. And when I'm talking of Terakuthu, we spoke about it, about the identity, that how new rituals are also being created. And it's a very important thing. And since you would be seeing that is in Tamil Nadu, where Draupadi Amman festival is happening, you also have another very important festival dedicated to Aravat, the Sanskrit hero Iravat. And he's there, the son of Arjun and Ulupi. And he sacrificed, we have the Barbaric, who is the grandson, the son of Ghatotkacha, and sometimes he's also seen as son of Bhima, but more popularly as Ghatotkacha's son, and who sacrificed in the war for the Pandavas to win because he's so powerful. And so that happens also in the Aravana. But he cannot be sacrificed unless he's married. On Indian rituals. All rituals can only be performed with your wife intact. So you have to have the marriage. You can't be sacrificed. You can't die before getting married. And now, which woman will marry, knowing that her husband, she's going to be widowed the next day? So everybody refuses. And so you have Krishna, like Matilal said, that ubiquitous mathematician, the Krishna is there to solve every dilemma. So Krishna says, koi baat nahi, I'll marry him, what's the problem? So for a night, he becomes a woman and he marries Ravan. Now imagine that how this ritual has influenced the transgender community in South India, in Tamil Nadu. And now the kind of pain that community goes through, and how this pain gets enacted through the ritual, but not only gets enacted, but also finds a validation of that identity, that all of them begin to identify with Krishna. Okay, a male in a female attire. Okay, so there is this 4-day ritual, where now like lakhs, even all over India, transgenders go for this festival. They call themselves Ali now, and then Ali has another tradition. I can't go on because there are so many traditions, but let's say that they call themselves Ali, and they get married to a Ravan. The talis are tied, and then after 4 days, then he's sacrificed. They all become widows, and this ritual was performed at IGNC also, and it's so heart-wrenching, when you see the crying, the pain it's the pain that these identities have suffered. And the ritual gives an outlet, not only for the pain to come, but it reaffirms their identity. And not only reaffirms the identity, but puts it at a very, very high level, where they become one with Krishna. So that is what makes Mahabharata a tradition. And that is what it makes it a living tradition. And now I'll just go back and show you something, if possible. Okay, now first I have to look for Palandeji, if I can find him.
First, you have to share the screen, ma'am.
Yeah, I will just let me find that tradition. If I have it here, Palandi, Mahabharat Katha Vachan. Yes, I will share this screen. Just a minute. Can you see it? Share. Yeah, no. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Let me.
दुर्योधन और निर्वस्त्र होकर के अपनी मां के पास आ रहा था। तुरंत गृष्टि की दृष्टि गई, भगवान कृष्ण ने दूर से देखकर शेम शेम कहा। जैसे उसको शेम शेम कहा तो तुरंत जो है दुर्योधन लज्जित हो गया। बोले किधर? नहीं नहीं। बोले क्या कारण है? कृष्ण समझ गए, अरे गांधारी, एक तरफ तू जो है अपने खानदान को बचाना चाहती है और दूसरी तरफ मुझे शाप देकर के कहते तेरे वंश का सत्यानाश। कोई बात नहीं। पूछा क्या बात है, सच बताओ, क्यों इस प्रकार से तुम जा रहे हो? क्या पागल हो गए हो? क्या इस तरह से ऐसे नग्न होकर के क्या तुम ऋषभदेव हो गए हो?
So yeah, I stopped share. So this is what I mean, and he was there for 18 days, and he's still in Banaras. Of late, I heard was that he had got paralytic attack and he couldn't speak. But I believe he recovered also, and I hope he leaves the legacy to his children, because he's the only Kathavachak remained of the Mahabharat, which performs publicly and people come. And so it's like any Bhagavad Katha or Ram Katha, Pravachan. We have the tradition of Pravachnas in the south and the northeast, but this is what, the Mahabharat mentions, what is happening in the Nemish Aranya and what is happening at the Janam Jaya. This is the tradition that we're talking about, and I hope that we're able to retain. And I go back to share screen, and I will show you now a long clip of all the traditions, that not all, but some of the traditions that we've talked about. Some of them I have not even spoken about today, but I hope you enjoy, and after that we can take the questions. So I hope it starts.
लेन के लड़ाई अरे जंघा ठोके तैयार है भूजा ठोके पूजा में तैयार प्रभु तोर महिमा हवे महान सारी दुनिया कान्हा तोर महिमा हवे महान सारी दुनिया அர்ஜுனனு மனமாறி அந்த கண்ணியவர் பின்னாலேதான் சென்றானம்மா போடை மனமாறி ஆமா மனமாறி கண்ணீருக்குள் சென்றானையா சென்றாரையா அகலோக பட்டணத்தை நாகலோக பட்டணத்தை வந்தடைந்தான் அர்ஜுனனும் நாகராணி நாககன்னியாக பெண் கோடியா அந்த அர்ஜுனனை மனதாலே மயக்கினாரே நாகராணி பெண் கோடியா அந்த பெண் கோடியா மனதாரே நினைத்தாளே
So yeah, here I am. Uh, I wish I could keep giving commentary, but then the music would have disturbed uh, very much. And so this is just, it's not even like the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. It's so little that I've managed to show you. But I think it gives you some idea about the geographic span and the generic span of the Mahabharata tradition across this country.
Shashri, please unmute Dr. Bala. Dr. Bala, you there? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Molly Kaushal, for this very informative talk. And I'm very sure everybody present here would definitely completely agree with me if I say you have really transported us into a different world of living tradition of Mahabharata as it is existent in India through your talk, as well as those fascinating videos that you have showed us, recordings that you have shown us. Thank you so much for that. And in fact, you have very well explained as how the prevalence of Mahabharata tradition, performing tradition especially, how vast and how existent, how prevalent it is throughout the country. And also, you have explained as how they are not just stories for them. The people who are performing, for them, they are not just stories. They have deeper meanings, and in fact, which may be when we look at them, we may consider them to be metaphysical or normative, whatever it may be, but they have the deeper meanings for themselves when they are living them and enacting them. And with regard to human relations and with regard to social relations as well. Thank you so much for all that. But one of the fascinating and very important points that you have made here on this platform is with regard to what qualifies it to be a living tradition. Now, that aspect is something that is to be taken seriously into consideration in understanding this Mahabharata as a living tradition. When you said only if it is if it has a dialogue, dialogue, it's not just a past thing that is being repeated. It has a dialogue with the present. So the dialogue between the past and present, and situating it in the present, and also bringing it to the present to see its relevance to the human life now is something that is very important when we look at these living traditions and the way they own it, the way they own the whole tradition and try to see it as their own life is something that is very important. And the way they throw questions and also they try to provide answers to those questions is something that is very fascinating. And we as basically academicians or outsiders are only looking at them and trying to understand them, but for them it has a different world altogether, no?
Yeah.
Especially uh, yeah, how Pandavas descend to the world, and how these living traditions try to challenge the popular traditions and also contribute indirectly to the popular tradition. Growth of the popular tradition is very important. Even there, the dialogue that you are stressing comes out. In fact, I was reminded of one of the previous speakers, Professor Lakshmi Bandlamudi. She also spoke about this, particular
Okay.
aspect. So that is, but she took text as the basis, but you took living tradition as the text. So that's a difference between these two. And yeah, how these various characters in Mahabharata were owned by various people of various regions. No, that is very important, very fascinating. A particular group of people from a particular place might have owned Karna, and people of a different place have owned Bhima. And this Draupadi, in South India, especially where I lived for a long time, Draupadi tradition was very strong. And every year they perform a ritual supporting, repeating this annual thing and trying to relive the whole thing. So that's very fascinating. Thank you so much for bringing all these things. But one of the things that you have spoken at the end, also you showed the video, Aravan Festival. In fact, I was fortunate to have a student who worked on Aravan cult. So we have recorded the whole thing, performance for UNESCO project. So I really relate myself so much to whatever you have said. Thank you so much. It is definitely a transcreation through cultural memory that all these people try to do every year and reenact and celebrate the life as it flows, and also enter into a dialogue with the past. Thank you so much for that fascinating talk that you have given us. We have a few questions. So if you don't mind, I will read out those questions so that you can respond one by one. The first question that we have here is, how do you think Mahabharata has impacted India socio-culturally? Has this impact been only positive, or is there any negative implications as well that you can see? Would you like to? It's a general question, of course.
Yeah, I already said that the consciousness, epics for us are civilizational consciousness. In fact, if you remove Mahabharat and Ramayana from the socio-cultural, aesthetic spaces, philosophical spaces of India, there's nothing left to it.
Yeah.
I haven't today taken up the pictorial, the sculptural, the iconography. There are so much more. And it's the basis of that emotional, spiritual anchor. And it is the fountainhead of all aesthetic expressions in India. And you take that out and you tell me what's left. And then these traditions that I have shown there, they're not coming from classical traditions. They're not Brahmanical traditions. They're not being there because a particular text has asked them to perform in this particular way. They are the expressions, as the Aravan, for example. They are expressions that are coming right from inside, of the journeys, of the very, very difficult journeys that individual lives, human lives, communities have gone through over centuries and continue to go over centuries. And it is through these aesthetic explosions, if you want to call them, that they are not cathartic as the Western drama is, we would like to say. These are empowering spaces. The communities have created these spaces to empower themselves. So I do not know, when you say negative implications, what do you mean by negative implication? I'm not getting into the political discourse. I am still within the frame of the communities of India, the diversity of India, the plurality of India, the dialogue of India. And it is that dialogue that is our anchor. It's that dialogue which is a window to our future. And that's what these communities are showing us.
Thank you so much for that response. I'll go to the next question. As you talked about the text and performance and said that it is performance that helps the text to survive, are you in a way regarding performance, perhaps practice of the text, more significant than the text itself? Please shed some light on this.
See, it's not the question of importance, what comes first and what survives, what sustains. The both sustain each other. Had the story been not there, the text, that's why we started with what the metaphor that Mahabharat itself throws up, and we kind of try to give it a different shape, is the tree. You have the root, Then you have the trunk and you have the branches. So the root lies that story of which text and multiple texts are there. And because it's a mass pool of knowledge, these are mass texts, that they survive and they sustain each other. If it was just, we've not died down like Iliad and Odyssey. So that, I think, explains. You cannot see one in isolation with the other. They feed into each other. They enrich the two traditions. When Palande ji is giving his Katha Vachana, and when you've heard of the Bhagavad Katha, or if you've heard, for example, Murari Bapu, tell me where the text begins and where the performance begins, or where the two end.
Yeah, thank you. And also the dialogue that you are stressing in the text, dialogue with the text and dialogue within the performing tradition are completely different. So the variedness is very important than the prioritizing of each one of them.
And the nature of the dialogue in each context will be different. What you take from each other is very, very context bound again.
Thank you so much. I'll go to the next question. For those of us who are not proficient in Sanskrit, is it possible that we might get different levels of meaning in the Mahabharata through the translations of others? Is there some important loss of meaning that you see?
Well, all these traditions that you saw, none of them know Sanskrit, and they've not read Vyas. So meanings that you draw, I mean, it's been said about Indian epic, it's said about the tradition that nobody is read, but everybody knows. And the tradition is alive. Also, kind of conjoining it with the previous question, is that it is my understanding, mine as an individual, my as a community, my as a context, and then giving expression to it, which is important. That is why they are fluid texts. That is why they are living texts. If it was just to be read and understood only in terms of the Granth, then this multiplicity of tradition would not have existed.
Yeah, the meaning, where do you place it? No, it has to be placed with the reader or the performer who is actively engaging with the text.
And every time that you're creating something new, you're adding something new. And that is why they are situational. They're situated in the now. They're situated in particular spaces, in particular locations, in particular times. And the relevance of the Mahabharat is not just in that one historical moment when Ganesha as a scribe sat and wrote down. Its significance lies in the now, in the present. And in the present, there are all these texts which have taken the story and then added and given it to dimensions for finding answers to the questions that are important, relevant, and significant to them, vis-a-vis the tradition, vis-a-vis the human predicament, vis-a-vis their own local histories.
Yeah, in fact, that's what provides space for the dialogue. And the result of the dialogue is the meaning. So that's Absolutely. Where we arrive at. Yeah, thank you. I'll go to the next question. Rituals in communities are expected to hold the spark of highest truths. But at present, rituals are more ceremonies of pomp and grandeur than carriers of moral spark. Do you think that people now get inspired by the ideals of Yudhishthira, Arjuna, and Bhishma, Krishna, Rama, Lakshmana, and Sita?
Very interesting question. Again, it kind of brings our whole discourse to a closure, kind of a thing. As we're saying, what meanings are we looking into these characters? It's not Ram as Ram per se, Sita as Sita per se, or Bhishma as Bhishma. It is the questions that arise in my existence, in my space and place, that I come back to them and I begin to seek answers. Bhishma become significant to me not because Bhishma is there in some text which is venerated text, that the kind of predicament that humanity goes through, the kind of human predicament that is there in the Mahabharata is what makes it relevant. And when you say the rituals are only pomp and show, is from the space that you're looking at them. Where are you located in the place? For Aravan, for the Alis, for those transgenders, you think it's pomp and show, and it's a new ritual, and it's a growing ritual. For the Garhwal, Himalayas, they do it, and the performances begin in November, December, when there is heavy snow and it's the highest reaches of the Do you think it is irrelevant? It is just a tamasha for them? Their very identity is being sustained by the ritual. It is sitting in Delhi, watching this in the IGNCA or on my TV screen, that we can, because I have willingly removed myself from it. I willingly stopped asking questions of my tradition. If I will ask questions, they will be relevant. The point is to keep the dialogue alive. And the responsibility is then on me from the place that I'm located at. So where you will see this tradition from which vintage point are you engaging with the tradition, which is important.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. I'll go to the next question. Apart from Lord Krishna, Arjuna is also known for changing his identity during the 14 years banishment, and he is seen in disguise of Brahmanala. Can you please share or highlight more on this disguise of Arjuna also? Can one say that Brahmanala is also a case of transgender, or yeah, or not?
Well, if you would want that kind of answer and that kind of questioning with it, you will have to go into the psychoanalytical discourse of the text. And again, it will again depend on who is asking the question and from which angle the question. There is no one meaning to these characters. There is no one meaning to this text. And that is why it continues to be alive. So if you would look at it in terms of very psychoanalytical, then you will have to go deeper. I mean, for me to immediately say that yes, it's a case of transgender would be a lie. I must get into the text. I must get into all the vyakhyas on the Arjun. Do you know how much amount of literature, the tikas, the bhashya, the vyakhyas exist on each single word that is being said in the Mahabharat or in the Ramkatha? So for me to just, give a popular answer is not possible. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I am not Wendy Flahati to give you an immediate answer to this question.
Yeah, but probably somebody can research on this, or the questioner himself or herself can
maybe,
research on
look
that.
into this, that whether Brahmanala is, whether it is that particular desire, that's arising, and whether it's inversion of roles, for example. We don't know.
Yeah, I'll go. Yeah, thank you. I'll go to the next one that I see here. Can you please let us know if there are living traditions that give space to Dhritarashtra? Have you ever seen any tradition where Dhritarashtra is given space, sufficient space?
No, I'm afraid, no, I'm not seen. I mean, there are traditions where, you have Duryodhan, for example, Karna, for example, yes. Even Gundhari, for example, yes. But I think what is said of Dhritarashtra as the one seed or that root of the tree holds true, because you have two very, very strong moral, immoral barometers. On one side is Dhritarashtra and other side is Krishna. So it's not Dhritarashtra just a character. Dhritarashtra lies at that very, which is the blind anger, the rage, that he is that tree which is going to eventually get uprooted when the storm comes, and that's what tradition believes. So I really have no, I mean, Hidimba is there, Ghatotkach is there, you know, you have Hidimba temples, you have the Hidimba as goddess, the Ghatotkach is worshipped too, Duryodhan is worshipped, Dushasan is not. So again, I mean, you have to go deeper and deeper and deeper into these why, you know, communities are kind of interacting with these characters the way they are interacting.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Molly Kaushal, for responding to all the queries that our participants have raised. And it was really a very informative session. Thank you from the bottom of the heart. I'm thanking you for this wonderful interaction. Over to you, Dr. Geetesh.
Thank you so much, Dr. Professor Balaganpatiji. Thank you so much. And I thank all the audience and all the people who've asked questions, because then that means that we need to go into deeper engagement with the tradition in order to.
Thank you, Professor Bala. I think Dr. Molly Kaushal made an academically vibrant and aesthetic presentation of the living tradition of the epic, explicating how the Vada, the Vivada, and Samvada culture of the epic, as well as how Mahabharata is kept alive not only by the scholars, but actually by the performing folk artists of the country. So beautifully, Dr. Kaushal explained how a living tradition of Mahabharata is a living tradition through performances because of the situatedness of knowledge in the epic, which undoubtedly has relevance for the present time. And that actually generates the epic consciousness, the very expression that she used in her address. And that inspires the communities to merge and submerge in these epic traditions. Well, Dr. Kaushal, your address of today will definitely inspire many younger scholars to dig deeper into the epic through the performative artwork related to Mahabharata. And to our participants present here, I would like to share that Dr. Molly Kaushal, it is actually to Dr. Molly Kaushal the credit that goes for reclaiming the folk traditions of India under the aegis of IGNCA. And if anybody gets a chance, though we are now in a phase where we can't actually go to these spaces very openly the way we could, but still I would really encourage the scholars to go and visit the space, because quite a lot of work has been done by Dr. Molly Kaushal on the two epics, especially the folk tradition, and try to read the literature that she makes it available for people. Well, on behalf of the Department of Philosophy of University of Delhi and Kamala Nehru College, I thank Dr. Molly Kaushal for being with us today on a Sunday evening. Thank you for sparing your precious time and actually making our Sunday evening very live through the folk tradition of India in light of Mahabharata. I thank the participants for being with us today, and I request all of you to follow our social media handles, which we are updating on regular basis. Please feel free to share these links with all those who are interested in the epic tradition of Mahabharata.